I had a subscriber, her name's Kimberly. She's in the 5th grade. And she asked that I would do a video on some of the different tree species that are around Austin and the Round Rock Cedar Park area. So I thought, you know what? I'm gonna take a walk. It's a beautiful, beautiful day. I'm in Cedar Park, which is right on the edge of Austin, Texas. And I wanted to go over some of the common trees that we have, some of the most common. And trees are like people in a lot of ways. One of those ways, Kimberly, is their strengths. Every tree species has a strength, and they do better in certain environments than others. So what I'm going to do is walk around, and these are the environments that these particular trees naturally love. And you have your strengths, and it's nice to know what those are and grow those and flourish with them. Find out what your strengths are and nurture those like a plant or a seed. You want to encourage it. Make sure you learn about those areas that you're interested in. Get advice from others that are good at it, and follow the things that you're passionate about, because very likely within those passions are natural strengths that you were born with that are unlike anyone else. And trees are the same. They're very similar, and they can go through so many things. I've been working with trees for a long time, and they have miracles that I can only explain, kind of like miracles that surprise me, and in every way in science should not happen, and they do. So let me show you some of the trees that I'm going to see right here. I see some right now, so let's get into that. All right, I'm going to walk over to some right now. Okay, here's a species that you see a whole lot of. That's often called a cedar, but it's actually not a cedar. It's actually an Ash Juniper. And this one here, this area here, this one, it's actually a female. And here's how I know it's a female. If you look at it, you've got these little blue, they look like berries, but they're actually not berries. These are actually cones, and they have a seed in them. A few things about these trees that are interesting is that they live a pretty long time, multiple decades. I would say up to about 90 years old, maybe up to 100. They get to about 30, 35 feet. That's what all of these are right here. Here's a group of them right there, all of that. These particular trees, some of the environments that they actually like is similar to what this is. A lot of limestone. They love limestone. They like areas that are actually pretty rough. They do well in soils that aren't maintained very well. They handle drought really well, which is why these are doing so well out here, is because this doesn't get a whole lot of water out here in Texas. It's surrounded by a lot of stone. They help with erosion. They help hold the soil and make see how that soil is kind of nice and brown. There's a lot of nutrients in that, and it helps little grasses, small plants, ferns, and things like that grow to hold the soil together so it doesn't completely erode. Look at all this rock. This is all limestone. There's no trees growing on it, but where there are trees growing, it's holding the soil together. And we've got dirt, which is soil. In fact, here's an interesting thing. When I say dirt, actually, that's not a good thing. Dirt doesn't have life in it. Soil is dirt that has microbes and living organisms. So that's just a little technical difference. Soil is full of life. It's a lot like the ocean. So dirt is technically bad soil, and soil is a healthy dirt, if you want to call it that. So here they are doing what they do, helping with erosion, holding the soil together, giving an environment for things like cactus and small plants. Some people might call these weeds, but they're not weeds in this case. All types of grasses, holding the soil together so it doesn't just all wash away. All right, all of this is it. This is also Ash Juniper. Look at that bark. And this here, this discoloration in the bark, that's nothing bad. That's their characteristics. More Ash Junipers. And let's go see what else we can find. So far, I'm surrounded by a whole lot of Ash Junipers and prickly pear cactus, which are all of these right here. That's another interesting one. Let's talk about prickly pear cactus, actually. You see these all over Texas. This is a prickly pear. And prickly pears, they'll have flowers. I believe they're pink. They have a fruit that you can actually eat. You want to, of course, be very careful of any needles or any of the things that might have possibly bumped up against it. but the fruit can be eaten. There's a lot of recipes that actually call for cactus, and it's used in many cultures, and they're easy to find. They're everywhere. It's so easy to cultivate as well. If you just take a piece of it and plant it just very shallow, they'll probably take off. It's very easy to do that. And they grow in kind of large bunches, kind of like this, just like we're seeing here. This is their natural habitat. This is what they like. You'll see them in large chunks, maybe about 10 or 15 feet or so wide in areas. They blend in really well too. I just about walked into this one. So see, you can barely see it. If you're walking around in an area like this, you want to be careful, because whenever you bump up against them, these long ones will go right through a tennis shoe like this. And it's these little fuzzy ones, the little fuzzy needles right there. Those little guys, these little tiny ones, certainly this. But these little ones, oh my goodness, they hurt. They hurt pretty bad. It's they're irritating, and they won't do anything long term. So if you ever bump into one of these, you're going to be all right. But it does hurt. You have to get them out with the little tweezers and things. All right, I'm going to watch where I'm walking, because I don't want to walk into one of them. They're everywhere. Okay, this is interesting. I used to live in this neighborhood years ago, back in the 80s, when I was in 6th grade. So just a little older than Kimberly, who's asking the question, in 5th grade. I was just 1 year older than you, and I lived in this neighborhood. And what I would do is, the house I lived in was way off that way, and I could see a tree off in the distance from my window, my bedroom window. And I love to wander around. I still do. I never grew out of that. And I wondered what this tree was out my window that had a unique shape to it. So I came out here and found that tree that had this unique little shape to it. Oh, and the tree's not doing, the tree's not doing so good these days. But that was a long time ago. I hate to say how long ago that was, but a good 35 years ago or more. Yeah, longer than that. Anyhow, look at this tree. This tree right here, I could see from my bedroom window. It used to have leaves all over it. So I walked over and found it. And look what I found when I got here. But this grate wasn't on here back then. This wasn't on here. And I climbed down in here when I was a kid, when I was really little. I climbed down into here. Yeah, all down in there. Besides all of the various animal bones that I found in here, I found an old rusted gun, a pistol. And I believe it was from the late 1800s, maybe the very early 1900s. It was a hectagon barrel, and that's a unique shape. They weren't like that in more recent times. That's that very old design. And that's what I found down here. But yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting. I've always liked going into areas that just grabbed my attention. And even then, even in 6th grade, walking out into the woods with a little compass and finding this and others. There's other caves in this neighborhood that I found, and I went into them by myself, which I don't recommend. That's definitely not good. Okay, you don't want to do that when you find a cave in the middle of nowhere. You really don't want to do that. And even what I did here was kind of dangerous, so I really don't recommend it. But I wandered everywhere. If I saw an area I'd never seen before, if I saw an area I was interested in, I just went to it. I'd walk out into it, camp in the backyard, camped out here. And that's how I was when I was a kid, and I'm the same way now as an adult. I get in my truck and I drive everywhere just to see interesting things. And I'm always finding something interesting, such as this. And it's really cool to be back here after all these years because of your question about you wanting to know about some other tree species in the area. And let's talk about the special tree that brought me out here in the first place back when I was in 6th grade. And I think it was actually the summer of 5th grade that I actually found it. Let's talk about this tree. It's a cedar elm. And here's some interesting things about the cedar elm. So cedar elms, you'll find all over Texas. They're native to Texas. cedar elms are deciduous versus an evergreen. A deciduous tree is a tree that drops its leaves usually in the winter. An evergreen tree will keep its leaves or needles all year long. There are semi-evergreen trees that will drop their leaves momentarily and put them right back on, and they're pretty much an evergreen. But cedar elms are deciduous, meaning it drops its leaves in the winter. It's not quite spring yet, so it hasn't put its new leaves out, even though this tree is largely dead. Okay, the tree is still alive, and I can tell by the buds on the end that the tree is actually still alive. It's going to green out. There's also something else interesting in this tree. The green that you see right here, see that green? That's actually not leaves of the tree. Those are not cedar elm leaves. That's mistletoe. And mistletoe is considered, and it is, a parasite. Something that's a parasite takes its energy from its host. Mistletoe does the same thing. What mistletoe does is get its nutrients and water from the tree. So it is hurting the tree by taking very valuable nutrients and water. And enough mistletoe can weaken a tree and have it and kill it, or at least add additional stress to it, which can be one thing too many. Okay, so even though mistletoe can be really pretty bad for a tree, they do have some really good things about them. They have some medicinal or some health benefits to them. Many parts of the world use them in ceremonies and highly value mistletoe. So it's not all bad. I'm partial for the trees, of course, but like I was saying earlier, everything has a strength, and there's a place for pretty much everything that we have, and there's a place for mistletoe. Though I don't want it on any of the trees that I'm keeping an eye on or trying to help, it does have its good benefits. In the case of this tree, knowing what I know now, one of the things that I think I was looking at when I was looking out my window, looking at its unique shapes throughout the year, I was looking at mistletoe, because the leaves were gone and it had dropped its leaves for the winter, but there were green spots that looked like big pom-poms. Everything else on the tree looked dead from so far away. I don't know, maybe a quarter mile or half a mile away, about half a mile, I think. I'm positive at this point, most of what I was looking at least during the winter for sure, I was looking at the mistletoe. And that's partly why this tree is not doing so well. It's not the reason. It looks like there's storm damage, and it's a tough area to live. Drought. There's not much water out here. There's not much soil. I'm sorry I can't show you what the leaves look like right now because it's not spring yet, but I can show you what the bark looks like. Which, by the way, I find interesting. You can still identify a tree accurately in the winter by learning about its bud and its structure and its twigs and things like that, and its bark texture and look. I can look at a tree mostly, definitely in this area, and generally know what type of tree it is because of these other characteristics. At a certain point, you won't need leaves to determine what kind of tree species it is, though it definitely helps. But let's take a look at this bark here. Okay, the bark of the cedar elm is really pretty gray like this. If you can kind of tell, it's somewhat flat, kind of flaky, maybe kind of like a certain desserts. The bark kind of flakes off. It's not very thick. It's actually pretty thin compared to other things like live oaks. But that's the bark of a cedar elm. Speaking of live oaks, a cedar elm can look very similar to a live oak. And it gets confused between the two often by those that aren't as familiar with the tree. And it can really scare someone whenever they think that their live oak, which is actually a cedar elm, drops its leaves in the winter, and they can think that the tree has died. That's another thing that's important. We need to know what kind of tree we're looking at when we're looking at trees and trying to diagnose what's going on with them. If someone thought that that tree back there was a live oak and it dropped its leaves, it would make sense for them to think that the tree has died, because live oaks keep their leaves year round. They're a semi-evergreen. They're one of the type of trees like I was talking about a moment ago. They lose their leaves about once a year, sometimes kind of twice, a couple of times of the years they kind of drop their leaves, large portions of the leaves, but not all of them at once. And it can make them look really rough and worse than they actually are. They might not be sick, and they might just be doing what they're meant to do. In Texas, that happens a lot. Around late February, mid-March and March, throughout the month of March, they can drop their leaves. The leaves can turn kind of yellow and people can think something's really wrong with the oak. Okay, that's a whole other video about tree diseases, which, by the way, Kimberly, that's my specialty, is tree health care, is knowing when a tree gets sick and what to do to help them. That's why I do pay attention to the details in trees, and the details matter. They can make the difference of diagnosing a tree properly or misdiagnosing a tree. All right, let's see what else we can find around here. All right, so that was part 1 of 2 about some of the most common trees found in the Austin and surrounding areas. In the next video, I'll touch base a little bit more on live oaks and some of their characteristics. I'll also get into my personal favorite climbing method, which is very traditional. It's very old school and uses very little equipment. It's just my favorite way of getting up into the trees. I'll also go over my favorite tree species, which is the live oak. I'll go over some of the reasons why that's the case. Thank you, Kimberly, for asking the question. I think it's a question many people have about what are some of the most common trees in the area. I look forward to getting the next video out and answering your question in more detail. If you have any questions or comments, please post them in the comment section, and I look forward to getting the other video out for you. Thank you all for watching.